All right, so welcome everyone. Thanks for coming to the Sports Medicine Club meeting for September. Some updates. We are still selling masks. This is our fundraiser currently. So please, if you haven't purchased a mask, please buy one. You can Venmo our treasurer, Kimmy Abrams, and feel free to share with your friends and family and order masks for them as well. As far as club dues, those are also $5. If you haven't already, again, just submit that to Kimmy Abrams and spread the word to your classmates if they're interested in sports medicine. This is a great way to get involved. Journal Club, as usual, Dre will be leading that portion in a few minutes. And if you have ideas for articles, you can always reach out to Dre and email him your ideas. We have the shoe drive, the footwear drive, which is still going on. So that's used shoes and new socks. We really want to be able to do one more donation at some point in October. So please, please, please donate shoes and new socks. And another update we have is that we are working on putting together a breast cancer awareness 5K, I believe a 5K, in October. So Will has more details about that, but it's still in progress, but you should be finding more about that soon. And that's it.
So yeah, basically to touch on the run a little bit more, what it is, it's going to be a combination between women in podiatry, the Public Health Club, and SNAPMA. So it's going to be, what we're tentatively deciding to do is make it 100K. So it's a race between the clubs of whoever could reach 100K of either miles or dollars donated. And the max that a person could do is 10. So if you want to donate $10, you donate $10. If you want to run 10K, you run 10K. If you want to run 1K and donate $9, sure. But the max you could do is 10K. We might make that a little higher depending on how many people sign up. And then all of those proceeds are going to go towards a clinic. I could give the details out, in the city that gives like free breast cancer screenings predominantly to people of color and Black and brown people. I think it's 80% Hispanic and Blacks, which is why we have SNAPMA together working with women podiatry and public health. And then the sports medicine component is the running of it. That's that. Next slide. So stretching is very important, and this is something that many of us may neglect, whether it was before, during, after this quarantine situation, but it is very important, and it helps increase flexibility and fascia length and prevents injury, and it increases range of motion. So, when to static stretch versus dynamic stretch. This is a key thing that a lot of people kind of struggle with and make the mistake of doing one over the other. And I'm going to get into the details of the difference between static stretching and dynamic stretching. But the basic overview is that a static stretch is the traditional stretch that we grew up learning. Touching your toes for 15, 30, 20 seconds, whatever it may be. Stand up, grab your quad, hold that for whatever amount of time. That's static stretching. Dynamic stretching is more of like the leg swings, the high knees, the butt kicks, the karaoke, things of those nature where you're working the muscles in an extended range of motion, but while moving and working with your body in a natural rhythm. So static stretching. Static stretching is very important and it needs to be a part of everybody's regimen, but there's a proper way to stretch and there's a proper time to static stretch. The best time to static stretch is post vigorous to moderate activity, post whatever activity you plan on doing, not prior. The reason being is because static stretching utilizes a lot of energy to do in the first place. So one, you're going to be decreasing your energy output for the activity you're trying to do. It reduces the blood flow to the area. It stretches without actively activating the muscle. So what you're really doing is think of it as if you had like a water balloon and you took it and you stretched out the water balloon. Your blood flow to that water balloon and how much you could fit per square foot or square inch of that water balloon is going to decrease. So that's a way to conceptually think about it. And it's going to drastically decrease your nervous system firing capabilities. So prior to exercising, one of the things that people run into issues with is when their nervous system isn't primed for exercise, which is why dynamic stretching is very important prior. And static stretching is very important after. And static stretching after will help increase muscle length, increase fascia length, prevent contractures of the fascia, calm the nervous system down after vigorous activity to prevent cramping and over tightness of muscles, especially if you do something like, let's say, heavy squat, and then you go to sit down for how many hours you're in class. If you don't stretch prior, you're going to cramp up, you're going to lock up the muscles, and over time, your muscle length may decrease, mainly because of the fascia getting tight. Dynamic stretching. Very important beforehand. So dynamic stretching does everything we thought static stretching would do and doesn't have the fallbacks of my door just slammed on its own. I think the wind blew. Doesn't have the drawbacks of static stretching. Like I said, one of the drawbacks is decreased blood flow. For static stretching, that is the opposite of dynamic stretching because you're lightly priming these muscles. You're getting these muscles active and you're calling on the blood supply to these muscles. You're priming the nervous system. You're getting, it's you warming the muscle up and getting the muscle ready for the amount of activity that it's going to do without jumping directly into it. So for example, doing high knees and butt kicks prior to a sprint is a perfect way to give your body and your nervous system time to acclimate to what you're about to put it under. And there's varying numbers and there's varying research, and I believe the Journal Club would touch more on a specific article review, but it substantially decreases your risk of injury if you dynamic stretch prior to activity versus static stretching or no stretching at all. And that's it. I kept it short. If there's any questions, please feel free to ask.
Yeah, well, quick question. Does this all apply to when you have an injury as well?
So that is a very good question, and the answer is yes. So basically, an injury is when you tear a muscle, you injure fascia, things of that nature. But when you're exercising, you give yourself micro tears. So technically, you're injuring the muscle every time you work out vigorously. So you still want to give the body the time to acclimate to the next phase of activity, whether that is high levels of activity or whether that's very low levels of activity because you're recovering from an injury. But you still want to get the muscles primed prior to doing things from physical therapy to elite training. But there is a substantial decrease in the amount of force you want to put on these muscles if you're injured.
Cool. Thanks. Makes sense.
Yeah. And then also the purpose of static stretching after is because you're creating these micro tears, you're creating these micro injuries. And when things tend to heal, they tend to heal back tighter and stronger. And that goes for muscle, that goes for bone. So what you want to do is to prevent that over shortening or that over contracture. So that's when static stretching is good after. And when you're injured, if you pull a muscle and let's say you tear your bicep off the bone, right? And you constantly, and you're recovering with your arm past 90-degree flexion. Once that muscle heals, it's going to heal shorter and much tighter. And what you want to do is when you want to increase that range of motion throughout the healing process. So that's when stretching is important for injury. Cool, great. So Dre, you want to take over for the Journal Club and kind of tie it in?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so the article I sent out for Journal Club is a systematic review that looks at static stretching and dynamic stretching, and also a third method of stretching called PNF stretching, which is proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation, which is a little bit more rarely used. But they basically did a literature search to see if they could find any data on which of these types of stretching would be better. And to include articles, the selection criteria were that the study contained research questions relating to the effects of static stretching, dynamic stretching, and PNF, that they were performed by healthy and active subjects, that the outcome was physiologically or performance measure, and that the study was in English. And some other selection criteria also included having a control group, a randomized trials, and instruments with high reliability and validity. And the amount of studies they had was 125 for static stretching and about 145 for dynamic stretching. And so they broke these studies into different categories, depending on what type of movements you could have. And there's a lot of categories for this, which I don't want to go into all of them because it would take too long. But the basic findings were that static stretching prior to exercise was associated with a decrease in performance of about 3.7%. Dynamic stretching had an increase overall in performance, about 1.3, and PNF had a decrease of 4.4. And so when you're looking at the data, some of the issues that the researchers came across were that the average time of stretching was not what you would typically spend stretching in a normal athletic event. So for instance, when they were looking at static stretching, when they looked at studies which had the time as under 1 minute of stretching, they only saw a decrease of 1.1%, whereas stretching that took place more than 1 minute had a decrease of 4.6%. However, all of these studies were capped at around 3 minutes of stretching. And typically what you would see is about 10 minutes or so in most sports activities. And this goes along with what Will said earlier, that static stretching does, in fact, you take a hit on your performance if you do it before an exercise or an athletic event. And as Will covered before, that's due to the fact that you're putting some stress on your tendons, so your tendons are less stiff. You're also inducing fatigue into your muscles, and you're decreasing your blood flow. For the dynamic stretching, what they found was that there was a slight improvement, and it was about, 2.1% performance improvement over non-stretching groups. And with PNF, which PNF is a less used type of stretching, but basically it incorporates like isometric contractions, and like one example would be with a bicep curl, you're stretching out your bicep and then all of a sudden like lift a weight really fast, and that's like how PNF stretching is done. But that I don't want to go too much into that because it's very PNF is very prone to injury, so you can easily injure yourself doing that, and it's even the authors say that it's best not performed just because it's so prone to injury. But even in the few studies that they did look at for PNF, it did have a overall decrease in performance. So the overall takeaway is that prior to exercising, like Will said, dynamic stretching would be beneficial for you, whereas static would decrease your performance. And that's they had no conflict of interest to declare. Yeah, that about covers it. If there's any questions.
I just want to elaborate a little bit on PNF. You did a great job, but what I've gathered and a little bit of research that I've done is that PNF is best done when you have it done to you, when you have a practitioner work with you, as opposed to trying to do it yourself using weights or a static surface like a wall or something. Because when you do it with somebody else, they could work with you and they could give you the feedback necessary, the same amount of force that you're providing, as opposed to you working against whatever fixed amount of force you are using.
Yeah, and that was also one of the things they mentioned in the article, is that one of the drawbacks of PNF is requiring you to have a partner to be done correctly.
Nice.